After the lengthy war in Vietnam, there was a period where there were minor conflicts. Grenada, Operation Just Cause with Panama, Noriega, Desert Storm, and then, of course, the Battle of Mogadishu, or Operation Gothic Serpent, or the Blackhawk Down incident. A lot of soldiers, Marines, hadn't cut their teeth yet in combat, what they trained for, except those at the tip of the spear. Master Sergeant Paul Howe was one of them. We are very familiar with the Blackhawk Down incident. Paul Howe insisted that when 9/11 hit, the United States needed advisors for counterterrorism. And who did they turn to? Master Sergeant Paul Howe. Paul Howe served 20 years in the United States Army. He had retired at the rank of Master Sergeant. For 10 of those years, he was involved in the special operations. He was a prominent member of Delta Force in its community. Before we deep dive into Paul's military career, let's check out Delta Force, one of the most popular special force units in the United States. We also know very little about. Public record, Delta Force was created in 1977 after numerous well-publicized terrorist incidents led the United States to develop a full-time counterterrorism unit. Key military and government figures had already been briefed on this type of unit in the early 1960s. Charlie Beckwith, who was Special Forces Green Beret officer during the Vietnam era, served as an exchange officer with the British Army's 22nd Special Air Service during the Malayan emergency. When he returned, he presented details reporting highlighting the United States' vulnerability in not having a unit type similar to this, the Tier Top 1 unit, in that period focused on unconventional warfare, providing training and medical care for the indigenous fighters. But he also recognized that there was a need for not only a force of teachers, but a force of doers, highly adaptable and completely autonomous small teams with a broad array of special skills for direct action and counterterrorism missions. He briefed the military government figures who were resistant to creating a new unit outside of special forces or changing existing methods. By the mid-70s, as the threat of terrorism grew, the Pentagon and Army senior leaders appointed Beckwith to form a unit. Beckwith estimated it would take approximately 24 months to get this new unit mission ready. Beckwith's estimate came from a conversation he had with Brigadier Joe Watts while in England in 1976. Watts had made it clear to Beckwith that it would take 18 months to build a squadron, but advised him to tell the Army leaders it would still take the 2 years and not let anyone talk him out of what he was doing. To justify why it would take 2 years to build Delta, Beckwith and his staff drafted what they dubbed the Robert Redford Paper, which outlined its necessities and historical precedents for a 4-phase selection process and assessment. Delta Force was established on the 19th of November 1977 by Beckwith and Colonel Thomas Henry. In the meantime, Colonel Bob Blackgloves, Montel of the 5th Special Forces Group, created a unit to bridge the short-term gap that existed until Delta was up and ready to be going with volunteers through a specialized selection process. Most Delta Force operators and combat support members are selected from the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment and the United States Army Special Forces. Though selection is open to other special operations and conventional units across the Army and other military branches. They differ from special forces because they specialize also in doing more of a direct action contact, like the Ranger Battalion. However, they do a lot of the non-conventional operations like special forces. They are the elite, top tier, level 1, tip of the spear portion of the U.S. Army. In a late interview, Master Sergeant Paul Howe had made a statement stating that Delta operators that come from the Ranger Battalion, if they go back, after their time in Delta's done, they can always take a lot with them and teach those guys even more. Not much is known about Master Sergeant Paul Howe, his early life before his career in the military. However, public record, he was born in 1959. He enlisted in the United States Army in 1980. Charles Alvin Beckwith was his father-in-law. Paul had actually married his daughter, Major Constance Beckwith, or Connie Howe. She was a major in the Army Reserve. Colonel Beckwith is also the main founder of the elite unit Delta Force. They had 3 children together, one of which would be Airman First Class Mary Howe, who was qualified, and she was the AC-130 gunner in the United States Air Force. So let's jump in and do a dig and go over some of the accomplishments that Howe had during his career in Delta Force. In 1989, Kurt Muse, alleged CIA asset, was arrested for setting up covert anti-Noriega radio transmissions in Panama. The raid conducted by 23 Delta Force operators and was supported by the Night Stalkers Air Unit. They were delayed by the United States due to the invasion of Panama to arrest Noriega in Operation Just Cause on the 20th of December of 1989. Muse was later reported to the CIA operative by the Washington Post. The last contact he had with the American officials before the raid was with an unidentified American colonel. It took place in the prison's public viewing area. During a visit, an American helicopter buzzed at a low altitude and high speed above the prison. When the sound subsided, the colonel addressed Muse loud enough for the entire room to hear. He stated that there was an order to kill Muse if the United States were to become involved in a conflict with Panama, which essentially meant Muse was not a prisoner but a hostage. The colonel threatened that if anyone harmed him, everyone in the prison would be killed. Leading the operation was Lieutenant Colonel Eldon Bargwell and Major Gary L. Harrell. Delta Force operators inserted onto the roof from an MH-6 Little Bird helicopter. One operator was tasked to abseil down the side of the building, hang outside Muse's cell window, and eliminate the guard charged with killing Muse if a rescue was mounted. However, there was no guard there, and after breaching the rooftop door, the Delta operators descended the 2 flights of stairs towards Muse's cell. Delta operator killed the guard who was responsible for killing Muse in case of rescue. The lock on the door of the cell was shot twice, however it didn't break. Small explosive charges were used to gain access, and the Delta operators gave Muse body armor, a ballistic helmet, goggles, and moved him to the roof, where they'd be exfiltrated by the MH-6 birds back to the U.S. base. During extraction, Hughes' Little Bird helicopter transporting Muse crashed, and Delta Force operators Pat Savich, Tom Caldwell, James Sudderth, and Kelly Vanden were wounded. Everyone aboard the helicopter took cover in a nearby building, and the Delta operators managed to signal a gunship flying over the area with an infrared strobe. Delta was deployed during Desert Storm to the region and tasked with a number of responsibilities, including supporting regular Army units. They provide close protection detail for General Norman Schwarzkopf in Saudi Arabia. Army public relations officers tried to play down Schwarzkopf's growing number of bodyguards. Delta was tasked with hunting Scud missiles alongside British Special Air Service. On the last day of the ground war, a Delta sniper team located 26 Scuds in western Iraq, each aimed at Israel, armed with high-powered 50-caliber sniper rifles of approximately 3,000 yards. Delta squadrons punctured the missiles' fuel tanks, killed their crews. Had the Scuds been launched, Hussein's last gasp attempt at luring Israel into conflict might have been a successful one. With Israel in the fight, the delicate Arab coalition opposing Hussein would have been unraveled. General Schwarzkopf, who was commander of the coalition against Saddam Hussein, thanked Delta Force for the letter sent to him, which read in part, "You guys kept Israel out of the war." With the good success rate that Delta Force has accomplished, they were chosen for Operation Gothic Serpent. There was only 450 American military personnel permitted in Somalia for this. Delta Force was definitely first pick. Now, I've done multiple videos before on Blackhawk Down incident or the Operation Gothic Serpent. For more in depth on that conflict, definitely recommend checking those out. But a little background, there was a famine, and as there were warlords who were stealing from all the foreign aid and not killing their own people. i.e. was the target they were picking up for it. The Marines had already came in, cleared the beaches, the Rangers had already taken the airport. Delta Force was called in to hit targets. Many of the Delta Force members, rather than carrying a separate breaching shotgun, they would have the ultimate over and under 12 gauge, developed and manufactured by Cyanar, and mount to the lug nut of their Car 15 rifles. Very similar to the master key, however the master key locks onto the assault rifle, similar to a 203 launcher. The most common rifle at the time was still the M16A2. Common squad automatic weapon, or SAW, was the M249. Other Delta Force operators at the time for squad automatic weapons were still using the M60, MP5 machine pistols. As far as sidearms go, at the time, 1993 Mogadishu, the Beretta M9 had become the new standard issued sidearm. However, Delta operators still tended to use the M1911. On the afternoon of October 3rd, 1993, they had informed two lieutenants that Aidid's clan were at the residence of the Black Sea neighborhood in Mogadishu. The task force sent 19 aircraft, 12 vehicles, 160 men to capture them. The two Somali lieutenants, along 22 others, were quickly captured and loaded on the convoy of ground vehicles. However, armed militiamen and civilians, some of them women and children, converged on the target area from all over the state. Shortly before the mission was concluded, the MH-60 Blackhawk Super 6-1 was shot down by SNA forces using rocket-propelled grenades. Both pilots were killed in the impact, and the crew survived the crash. Shortly afterwards, another Blackhawk helicopter, Super 6-4, was shot down by an RPG fired from the ground. No rescue team was immediately available. The small surviving crew included one of the pilots, Michael Durant, who couldn't move after the 10th Mountain Force of Mogadishu Airport was halted and turned back by SNA ambush. And this is Master Sergeant Paul Howe's account of events that took place that day. Once Super 6-1 was shot down, QRF wasn't able to get in there quickly. Master Sergeant Howe and Delta Force operators made their way there, lock it down, and secure it.
I watched a little bird come from right to left, and when little bird kicked smoke, when I say kick smoke, he threw a smoke grenade. Actually, I think pushed it off of with his foot. And what ended up happening is I go, boom, I knew that's a crash site. And I started moving down that street on the left-hand side. Other teams started following me. They got on the other side of the street. We started pushing down towards the bird. What happened is we knew we were going to get there. We can punch through faster. We're more efficient on ground movement. And so we just started getting there. The biggest problem is having, if we got stopped and locked down, too many casualties, we'd have two separate perimeters. We'd have to defend that night, and that would be a very dangerous and situation you don't want to be in.
As the Delta Force members and the 75th Rangers held down Crash Site 1 over the radio, they hear Master Sergeant Howe and Delta Force members in his unit were unable to get to Crash Site 2 as they were busy securing Crash Site 1 from 2 blocks on each side of the road. Delta Force operators Gary Gordon and Randall Shugart asked multiple times over the radio to be inserted into the crash site number 2 to secure that and protect the crew if there are any members alive.
Shugart and Gordon didn't request permission to secure until convoy arrives.
Howe will later on say the last time he heard Shugart and Gordon speak was over the radio once they were given the green light to be inserted. Master Sergeant Howe, Delta Force, and the Ranger Battalion had arrived approximately at 4:22 p.m. at Crash Site 1 when they began securing the site. During that time, they would face several waves of Somalis militias, and the convoys were getting hit with RPGs and heavy machine gun fire. Howe ensured everybody remained proactive, checking their mags, finding as much ammo as possible, tending to the wounded, guarding and blocking perimeters on both sides of the street. If the waves were getting too large, the 160th SOAR would fly by and the little birds and do gun runs and clear it out. They had fought through the night until 1:55 a.m. when the convoy finally arrived. A rescue convoy of nearly 70 vehicles long was organized and bolstered by hundreds of UNSOM forces, including 19th Battalion Royal Malay Regiment of Pakistan, 15th FF Regiment and Squadron, 48 Pattons, and 19th Lancers in the U.S. Army 2nd Battalion, 14th Infantry, 10th Mountain Division. After hours of heavy combat with the Somalis, the rescue convoy broke through and extracted the besieged forces. The mission's objective of capturing Aidid's associates was accomplished, but the battle turned out to be the most difficult close combat the U.S. troops have engaged since Vietnam. U.S. commanders unsuccessfully attempted to relieve the besieged troops with a small Ranger relief column, which was dispatched from the airfield only to lose 2 Humvees and 3 soldiers within a kilometer of the base. The Somali National Army commanders had anticipated an American response and had set up numerous coordinate ambushes. A few moments later, Charlie Company of the 10th Mountain Division Quick Reaction Force also tried to leave but was ambushed again on the Lennon Road by the same militias in a breakout attempt. About 100 U.S. soldiers fired nearly 60 rounds of ammo and hundreds of grenades in 30 minutes. A rescue convoy of nearly 70 vehicles long was organized and bolstered by hundreds of UNSOM forces, including 19th Battalion Royal Malay Regiment of Pakistan, 15th FF Regiment and Squadron, 48 Pattons, and 19th Lancers in the U.S. Army 2nd Battalion, 14th Infantry, 10th Mountain Division. After hours of heavy combat with the Somalis, the rescue convoy broke through and extracted the besieged forces. On the 4th, at 1:55 a.m., the convoy had arrived at Crash Site 1. Howe and the Delta Force operators approached the convoy.
What the armored vehicles were, they were full of troops, so there's no place for us to go. So what we did is we put our dead on top, they can't be killed again, put our wounded inside, and then we prepared to exfil.
Not all of the vehicles were armored. They had to put sandbags, Kevlar, whatever they could to try to bulletproof as much as possible. And as the convoy headed their direction back towards where their base was at, engaged in multiple firefights.
He's bleeding heavily, moaning. Somebody serviced him, shot him.
This had become notorious and become famously known as the Mogadishu Mile. Although they were back at the airport, there were still many people unaccounted for. And Master Sergeant Howe and the other members of Task Force Ranger, whether it be from the 75th Ranger Regiment, Delta Force, 10th Mountain Group, or the 160 SOAR. Nobody knew the whereabouts of Sugar Gordon until they saw CNN and saw their bodies being dragged through the streets. Chief Warrant Officer Mike Durant was still unaccounted for. Seeing this, the already exhausted operators immediately began preparing for going back out. However, they were ordered not to. The bodies, Sugart and Gordon, were retrieved. Chief Warrant Officer Durant was released to the Red Cross. No actions were taken any further. After the incident, which took place between October 3rd and 4th, 1993 in Mogadishu, all military operations were halted. Many members of the United States military that had participated in Operation Gothic Serpent felt that all of the deaths were in vain.
A lot of folks don't understand the concept of not leaving a fallen comrade, whether it be alive or dead. We just don't do that. We work with the task force people so long, the pilots. If I know if I called them, they'd come to get me. No matter what, shitstorm they had to fly through to get to me, they would do it. They'd be there. So we owe them that much respect. Somalis have a disregard for human life, and they have and also desecrating Americans, as you saw in the video.
After Master Sergeant Howe left the military in 2000, graduated with an MIS, Master's of Interdisciplinary Studies from Stephen F. Austin State University. After a 20-year military career, he became an instructor specializing in high-risk training for law enforcement. He works as a professional instructor and runs Combat Shooting and Tactics, which is a training facility in Nacogdoches, Texas, and he started the company in 2000. When September 11 attacks occurred in 2001, there was a demand for counterterrorism instruction. Howe served as an instructor for the counterterrorism company, the Halo Corporation International. The company employs former military special force members as instructors. Howe taught hostage rescue, firearms training, and Howe also focuses on hostage rescue when training law enforcement and SWAT teams. Howe's accounts of the Mogadishu incident were what Mark Bowden based the book Blackhawk down off of. Howe still to this day speaks of his accounts of that situation.